Congratulations, the decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative. I'll explain my reasoning. I think that there's a disconnect between the way that the affirmative is debating in the 1AR and the 2AR in terms of the explanations of the permutation and kind of like the use of narratives that doesn't really get answered, that I think the 2NR indicts and doesn't really get answered by the affirmative in their last speech. Overall, I think that the neg is ahead on this idea that the knowledge created within the academy gets co-opted. They're making some pretty good arguments, and I don't really have the examples that you all need, I think, to kind of like explain how we can produce this knowledge and it can be useful for me to say that it is safe for them to do this in this round. I'm like really example dependent in these scenarios in terms of like being able to hang my hat on why that would be a good methodology for the negative to engage in. So I essentially vote that that opacity can be a more useful structure than historical analysis, than historical analysis in terms of being able to break down whiteness. I think that you want to answer this backlining of the matriarch story or backburner of the matriarch story argument, and then you could probably get my ballot. I don't have a ton else to add.
All right. So the matriarch argument, there's no impact to it. You're just like,
no, you're right.
Didn't talk about it, and but they didn't talk about the poem connected to like the foster part either. So I'm not sure what that means or what the external impact is. At the end of the debate, so this is messy and like muddled in a lot of places. Actually, ended up voting half on presumption. I don't think that anyone is really winning much of anything. But I'm left with a couple of questions and a couple of missed opportunities. I think that everyone should exploit it. The negative strategy has been potentially made, and y'all talk about this, that their strategy, but I think it hurts you that the negative strategy of what it meant to wade in the water is made known through the study of history, which is taking away a strategy that black people could use. Now, we can't use it in the same ways, but it is made open and understandable and knowable and can be dissected because it was done, pushed in the academy, analyzed to death, and now, so you're like, everybody knows what you're doing, but does that help you or does that hurt you? That's a question, but then y'all have also performed that in the academy and then try to explain that as a good thing. So who does that work for and what do I do with that? So I think that that is more of a theoretical question about what does I don't think it is a direct offense for either side, but I believe it is a missed opportunity that you can use to frame your arguments through the one historical narrative of opacity that we have that has factually been brought into the academy. But does that deny that it was or still could be useful, whether in a religious sense or on the plantation or outside the plantation or for black people around the world? This is something that I feel like should have been talked about more. Second, does the AF blame black people for disenfranchising black people from debate? I think the answer in some places is no, and then in some places is yes, and that is weird, and I don't know why y'all don't talk about that. I largely agree that opacity is a bad strategy for black people to read against black people, and I've been very adamant about that for many years, because it's literally, we can't trust you and or you don't need to know what we're talking about. But the point of wading the water wasn't to decide which blacks were valuable enough to go into the water to escape. Like, that wasn't the purpose. So those are the reasons, right? So when they say they steal away from the academy, like, but you just called us the academy, so you stealing from other black people, and that seems to be what causes your uniqueness argument of the divided black community now. Like, I get that that we're here debating, but we just marched like literally yesterday to try to fix that, right? So your argument is that it's still fine to steal for black people. Y'all had a...
I do have a question. A couple of things. This was just like a strategic error on my part. Coming into the 2 and I was like, should I kick all of the white people out of the room? To then go more into like this undercommons argument, to be like the judges should just give you that ballot and you like decide what it should look like. It wasn't so much that we was trying to use the act of stealing that 1AC as an idea, but there was already knowledge that they was like, here, Academy, you can have. So we was just showing in a sense of like, this is not the place to have that discussion.
Well, no, I don't fault you for it, like, but like the idea of stealing, like, is that a reason why the AF loses then, right? Because you in other debates, it makes sense to be like, we should steal the AF or we should be steal, right? It's the way that our survival strategy versus other people, but in a world where your evidence is also talking about them, right? About black professors, black students who literally racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt with no intention to pay it back after they lived off the academy and leached off of it for 20 years, right? Are you not talking about them? Are they not stealing? So if you're stealing and they have the potential to steal, then why, like, these are questions that like I want you to answer. I think in certain ways, sometimes people use opacity, right? It's more about the performance usually that I feel like triggers the kind of link to divisiveness. But I think theoretically it begs the question of then why is it a reason to vote negative?
That makes sense.
I can get into the actual arguments now. Those are just things that I was thinking about. The app uniqueness claim from the beginning of the debate is that the law is bad, but that's just a random floating uniqueness claim that has nothing to do with the rest of the debate. In 2AC and the 1 year, I'm like, the law, and I have zero idea why you continue to talk about the law at all. I think it is strategic for the 2 ER to concede the negative uniqueness claim that the entire world is violent and isn't safe. I think in other debates you need a better explanation for why your study of history as a tactic can both spawn/inspire particular strategies that don't need to be revealed. I then believe that allows you to make the clear distinction between what it means to be visible but not transparent. I think that kind of explanation, right? So listening to Farrakhan speak yesterday, right? Farrakhan speaking, he said the goal, but he did not disclose the strategies that particular black people would use, right? Which is an important distinction that I think it helps you at least get some defense against the negative link arguments. The negative goes for 2 links, at least in my opinion, for like actual substantiated links and stuff about the matriarch, or there's a lot of just kind of like, not ranting, but like just wasted space where you're repeating yourself. And I wasn't entirely sure what the offense, there's more rhetorical questions rather than actual arguments made in the 2NR. The 2 links I think you go for is A, debate norms bad, that they try to fit into them. I'm not entirely sure, I don't know the warrant or the contextualization to the 1AC. B is using the academy, which was a very clear link. A, not entirely sure. Y'all are impact turns, you're like academy is good for visibility, but you don't even go for those impact turns in 2AR. You flag your argument as not going for the alternative, but then you still go for the moment evidence as a description of I'm not entirely sure. Is it a performance? What entirely is going on? Now, I don't think that means that I don't give you the idea that you're defending Melton anymore. I just think it's unclear for you to like I'm not going for the alternative, but then go for like a counter to the it seems weird.
All right, this was my thought process in going to that, and I kind of like sat down. I even talked to her. I was like, I knew this is where I messed up. But my analyzation of that or whatever was that even if I can see the alternative, it's still away from the academy, it's still a better thing than to do the app. Because in my mind, I was trying to put the app versus the status quo.
That's just a presumption argument. It's not a reason not to go for y'all. It's just that framing to be like, I'm not going for the alternative, but then spend time going on. It's not that it did not hurt you to say those words. It just is a weird framing, right, okay, and not complete. I think you go for this academy argument. There's no external impact or benefit to stealing from the academy. You don't explain to me what does that do, what does it prevent, what does it resolve. There's no explanation for that. Okay. The sole impact is that white people steal our history without a contextualization to the 1AC, but that is your uniqueness claim that they've conceded and framed their argument through. Why is it that white people steal a reason not to study our black history? There's not a story around that I can understand or put my hat on. The Wilderson debate is weird to me because neither team, their app is not antagonism. They're not defending Wilderson. I don't think they defend a form of humanism. They don't read the pessimistic portions of Hartman about slavery. They don't do any of those things. Foster's definitely not a pessimist. He's just studying, as a historian that also looks at a little bit of empirics in terms of like data analysis, but I'm not entirely sure what the link is to these arguments. It isn't answered. Y'all don't say, George Mason, y'all literally don't ever say the name Wilderson to respond to this argument. The problem is that I don't know the warrant for antagonism / slaveness, and I don't know why that is a reason not to do the F. Even if Black history is fractured, does that intensify the antagonism to attempt to study a fractured history? Does that breathe life back into humanism? Does that inflame, our desire to know the past in order to rejoin social society? Like, what is the impact to that? Why is that, like, what is the next? Y'all need to go next step on this argument, because I'm not entirely sure what to do with it, since that's not their uniqueness claim. So history can be anti-Black, but that's because white people were bad because the world's not safe, but that was the uniqueness claim to begin the debate. So I don't really know what to do with that. Y'all don't go for any offense in the 2AR, like none. So then my question is, your only offense that you're trying to go for is the performative whiteness, that they disenfranchise Black people, but I think I talked about that earlier, that you don't actually have a warrant for why they disenfranchise you. So then I'm left with, does the 1AC do something? And I think this is presumption flips F / permutation, which I'm not entirely sure what the permutation is even in the debate round. If I don't know what the F does entirely, and I can tell myself I'm not entirely sure what I'm voting for, is that the strategy of the negative of opacity? Now, there's a potential answer, yes. But it's not a question that I want to answer because I'm not entirely sure. Like, if I say yes or no, I still vote F. I either vote F on the permutation, or I presume F because you've gone for an alternative that I don't think resolves anything in the absence of negative offense, especially when they ask for a presumption flips F. So that's a long-winded. I just wanted to be detailed so y'all can understand that
I explained it. He was saying my family was reading it, this conjunction of the way I framed it is what made it seem like I was going for the alt. I shouldn't have spent that time on case.
Well, even absent the alternative, I don't think you win a turn to case argument. I think you win a heavy uniqueness argument that the world is unsafe because of white people, but that is not a reason not to do the affirmative, right? So questions of solvency are not zero sum. It is not, do they solve all anti-Black violence? I don't think that is a standard for solvency for any policy or critical act. The question is, what does it do to resolve history? Now, I don't think they do a very good job at all of telling me a single time that studying history has done anything for Black people, even a little bit, which is why I don't vote Afro-actively, but you don't have a disadvantage to it. And in a world where you go for this, like, stealing from the academy alternative, then where you go for the alt and you don't win the alternative, then that means presumption flips F, especially in a world where the affirmative points that out and is like, you should vote F on presumption.
What would we have to do to make presumption flip negative?
No, go for the alternative and explain why presumption then flips negative. Presumption flips F in the instance where you read / go for an alternative for two reasons. The first reason is that a world where you go for an alternative concedes that there's something wrong with the status quo. The second reason is that it prevents the negative from reading the F back against the F and saying vote negative. Is a tiebreaker in a way for the judge to understand the way in which change operates. So you can literally read the F back against them and be like, vote negative. That's not a reason to vote negative. I should presume affirmative, right? Because you don't have a net benefit to voting negative, right? They literally can't answer their own F, so then presumption has to flip F. But also going for an alternative begs the question of, is the status quo bad? They've gone in the direction of change the quo, which is another reason why presumption will flip F. If you either A, don't read an alternative, presumption always goes negative, but if you do read an alternative but don't go for it, you can reframe presumption in terms of the F versus the squo. So if you go for F versus the squo, you can go heavy on presumption / turns the case, right, which is what a critique does anyway, because a critique was not designed to have an alternative. Critiques originally just turned the case and proved that the F can't solve.
Just so I make sure I understand, before I do rebuttal reviews, from your explanation, it would have been better for me just answer the offense that they possibly had on opacity, then go into a discussion of like the Black matrix and kind of explain it more, not only because it was conceded, but that's kind of where we are ahead in this area of the debate.
I don't think that's a good argument either, just to be like they like have somehow footnoted the Black woman in the poetry because they didn't extend it, because they, like, you would have to do that in context of them also not extending the other poem from the 1AC. I feel like it's not a good argument. right? To be like, all of a sudden these black men have read a poem about black women and black men, but they didn't extend the portion about black women, so now they've done something wrong. I feel like that feeds their narrative from the 1AC.
Which argument is more appealing to you, I guess, that you think I should have framed the way the status quo?
I think go for presumption. You literally, I don't know what I'm voting for, which is why I don't proactively vote F. I think the 2NR, like, we don't need an alternative, but I dare you to vote affirmative, because you have to look, in a world where I don't go for an alternative, you have to literally tell me what they've done. Name an example from the 1AR. Name a reason why the F is good.
No doubt.
Anything, crickets, I'll wait. I literally don't have to say anything else, because there's not an F to vote for. Presumption flips negative, right? And you go through literally the 1AR and like, this is not a reason to vote F. I'm still looking for a reason to you have to proactively vote F, where you only have to not vote F to vote negative, right? And draw that distinction, and like, literally, I don't know. I don't think anyone could tell you why we voted F. I don't think Joe has a like substantial reason. He might see offense where I don't see it, but there's not like a robust reason to vote affirmative. And I think if you hammer down the 1AR, I think you could win a robust presumption claim.
Thanks.
So I view a lot of that very similarly. I think that the 2NR has a lot that you could win on, and like, you know, whether it be the way that they treat the poem and, you know, who they decide at forefront, or whether it be the Wilderson evidence in terms of the way that, you know, the way that history operates and the way that it gets denied. I think there's a lot of that, but you sort of spottedly go for them in brief and don't really impact out any one of them individually externally to being a link. And I think that spending more time on one of those would have been able to be offense for not voting for you for presumption, but a better story for, you know, how exactly they fully get co-opted. And so like giving examples of how they get co-opted and how something like historical analysis has been used as a way to get co-opted, right? And that Wilderson card, when I'm listening to it being read, is pretty good at explaining how literary history and the, you know, the inclusion of the slave narrative within these academic spaces are really bad. But you need to bring that analysis into an R and just sit on that portion of the debate, and then it becomes very easy for me to just see it's not that they're not doing anything, but they're actively doing something that is negative, that's going to set back the advancement of black people within debate space because of the way that they choose to engage within here. And I think that that's something that would be useful. I also think that in response to why do you have to be opaque to black people, you can make a distinction about being opaque to them versus being opaque to the white judges and the white people in the room, right? So it's like very clear that in cross-ex, they get what you're doing. But that, just because they get it, right, you'd be like, you get it, you know what we're doing. We're not being opaque to you. We're being opaque to everyone. We don't want to know what either of us are doing, right? And that gets you out of some of that offense. And then so you're not necessarily stealing from them, but you're stealing from the space that, you know, white people are able to listen to and take ideas from you and things along those lines, because you don't give us ideas to be able to work with, because it's not for us to be able to hear. And us, I mean, like, you know, my own position as being white. And so that way you're ending up stealing from the normative debate structures that are violent, opposed to stealing from people who, you know, you theoretically should be allied with. And I think that that delineation can be useful to you. And I think that getting into the differences between, like, you know, your strategy is opaque to a certain degree but is visible to another degree helps you better be able to navigate the tension between the permutation, hey, we're opaque, we don't really explain what we do, and we're doing something, and so we're being visible, and that's positive, right? And so if you could explain the distinction between what sort of visibility is good and what sort of opacity is good, and who can understand and who can't understand, would be useful, right? Like, because they clearly understand where, you know, that song comes from and the tracing of the genealogy of the history. I didn't know that until they were able to say that. That could be an example of where they have exposed to the master where that opacity, you know, what, you know, how that song waded in the water. I should know that, right? And other white people should know that sort of history. But now they've suddenly created a visibility of something that needed to remain opaque, and that becomes something that becomes problematic. But they knew what that was, and they knew that history. So your strategy of utilizing that was not you know, a form of opacity for them, but it was a form of opacity for people who do not know that history, right? And so that could be an articulation that you're making that draws a distinction between those two different things. I also think that in the 1NR, I would like more offense against the permutation, because a lot of your arguments on the permutation really aren't so much offense against them as so much of a sort of a defense of why, opacity is desirable and visibility is bad. I mean, you utilize, that's where the Wilderson evidence gets read, so to me, that's the best argument that you have there. But I think that the example of how they make your strategy no longer opaque, especially when they describe it, immediately from the get-go, it's like, okay, so you're doing opacity, whereas like, other people might not necessarily know that, so they're trying to, like, doing the preemptive type, like, why you gotta do preemption so much, right?
That's what I was saying.